I never imagined my life would shatter in the span of a single afternoon, but here I was, clutching the edge of the kitchen counter, gasping for air as the world spun around me. My best friend, Claire, and my husband Ethan, the two people I trusted most in the world, had become the source of my deepest betrayal. It started innocently enough, or so I thought. A few months ago, Claire began coming around less often. We used to spend weekends together, binge-watching trashy reality shows or sipping wine on my patio while laughing at old memories. But lately, she'd been distant, always claiming to be too busy. At first, I didn't think much of it. Life gets hectic. But then I started noticing how often Ethan would bring her up in conversation. "Claire got a promotion, did you hear?" he'd say, casually scrolling through his phone during dinner. Or, "I ran into Claire at the coffee shop this morning. She looked great, didn't she?" It wasn't just the mentions, though. It was the tone. Too light, too effortless, as if he was trying to mask something deeper. I dismissed it at first, telling myself I was overreacting. After all, Claire had been my best friend since college and Ethan adored me, or so I thought. But then Claire announced she was going on a work trip, a sudden urgent assignment that required her to be out of town for 2 weeks. She dropped the news casually during one of her rare visits, but her eyes darted nervously, avoiding mine. Something didn't sit right. I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't telling me the whole truth. And when Ethan didn't seem surprised or even curious, I knew I had to find out what was going on. The night before Claire's trip, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I tried to tell myself I was paranoid, that there was no way my best friend and my husband could betray me like this. But the nagging voice in my head wouldn't quiet down. The next morning, I decided to follow her. I parked my car a few blocks from Claire's house, feeling equal parts foolish and determined. Her bags were already in the trunk of her car, and she seemed to be in a hurry. I trailed her cautiously, my heart pounding with every turn. My mind kept replaying the small, suspicious moments I'd overlooked. Ethan's secretive smiles when Claire was around, the way he seemed to light up at the mere mention of her name. Claire didn't head to the airport as I expected. Instead, she drove across town to a boutique hotel. My stomach churned as I watched her pull into the parking lot. She got out of the car, glanced around nervously, and walked inside. I parked a safe distance away, my palms sweating as I debated my next move. Minutes felt like hours as I sat there, grappling with the enormity of what I might discover. Then, like a cruel twist in a movie, I saw him. Ethan. My Ethan. He walked through the hotel lobby doors, wearing the same jacket he had on when he kissed me goodbye that morning. My chest tightened and I felt like I couldn't breathe. The sight of them together was like a punch to the gut. Claire greeted him with a smile that wasn't meant for a best friend's husband, and he wrapped his arm around her waist as they disappeared inside. I wanted to storm in and confront them right then and there, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the shock, the disbelief, or the sheer weight of betrayal pressing down on me. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Proof. I needed proof, not just for myself, but for the inevitable confrontation that loomed ahead. The drive home was a blur. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, and tears streamed down my face as memories of our lives together flashed before me. Every anniversary, every whispered "I love you," every promise, they all felt like lies now. How long had this been going on? How many times had I missed the signs? When Ethan came home that evening, he was his usual charming self, acting as if nothing had happened. It made my stomach turn. I couldn't bring myself to say anything, not yet. I needed to process this betrayal, to figure out how to confront him and Claire without breaking completely. Over the next few days, I replayed the scene at the hotel in my mind, obsessing over every detail. I dug through Ethan's phone when he was in the shower, finding nothing incriminating. He was careful, meticulous even, which only deepened my anger. He had planned this, orchestrated every lie, and thought he could get away with it. But I wasn't going to let them. When Claire returned from her so-called work trip, I invited her over for coffee. She hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, perhaps out of guilt. Sitting across from her at my kitchen table, I couldn't help but feel a mix of rage and heartbreak. How could she look me in the eye and pretend everything was fine? I slid my phone across the table, the picture of her and Ethan at the hotel displayed on the screen. Her face drained of color as she stared at it, her hands trembling. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air was thick with tension, every second stretching into an eternity. How long? I finally asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes as she buried her face in her hands. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. Ethan walked into the room moments later, completely unaware of the storm brewing. When he saw the picture on the table and Claire's tear-streaked face, his expression shifted from confusion to panic. "It's not what it looks like," he stammered, but his words only fueled my fury. I stood up, my hands trembling with rage. "Not what it looks like? You think I'm blind? You think I don't see what's been happening right under my nose?" Ethan tried to explain, to justify, but I couldn't hear him over the sound of my own heartbreak. Claire sat frozen, her guilt written all over her face. In that moment I realized I'd lost not just my husband, but my best friend too. The two people I loved most had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I threw them both out that day, slamming the door on their lies and deceit. The pain didn't go away overnight. It still lingers, a dull ache that reminds me of what I lost. But I survived. I picked up the pieces of my shattered life and started over, stronger and wiser for the pain they caused me. Betrayal cuts deep, but it doesn't define me. I refuse to let their actions rob me of my future. They took enough already. I never imagined my life could be torn apart in a matter of moments, but the day it all came crashing down is forever burned into my memory. My world shifted, crumbled, and I found myself standing in the ruins of what I thought had been a strong, loving marriage. The worst part? I didn't see it coming, at least not until it was too late. Not until I caught a glimpse of the truth that had been hiding right in front of me, masked by lies, half-truths, and subtle betrayals. It was Ethan, my husband, and Claire, my best friend. The two people I had trusted more than anyone in the world. And they had both betrayed me in the most unimaginable way. It all started out so small, so seemingly insignificant. At first, Claire simply stopped coming around as much. We had always been close, almost like sisters, but slowly, over the past few months, she became harder to reach. I'd call her, send texts, but her replies were always brief, her excuses always the same. "I'm so busy with work," or "things are crazy at home." It wasn't just the calls, though. It was the absence, the emptiness where her familiar presence used to be. At first, I told myself that she was just going through a phase, that she was caught up in her own life. But then something shifted. Something darker started to creep into my thoughts. Ethan had always been the attentive, loving husband, but lately his behavior had started to feel off. It wasn't anything major, just small things. He'd mention Claire more than usual, not in a way that seemed particularly unusual at first. He'd say things like, "Claire got a new job promotion, I'm so proud of her." Or, "I ran into Claire today at the coffee shop. She looked amazing, didn't she?" But there was something about the way he said her name, a slight edge to his tone, like he was savoring it. I told myself I was being paranoid, but the seed of suspicion had already been planted. And when he spoke about her, I noticed he would linger on her name, as if he was remembering something or someone else. One evening, after he casually mentioned Claire again, something inside me snapped. I felt a wave of nausea sweep over me. Why was he so fixated on her? Why did I feel like I was being erased in our own relationship, replaced by someone who was supposed to be my friend? It was subtle at first, the way he talked about her, but it felt like a shift, a crack in the foundation of everything I had believed in. And then a few days later, Claire suddenly announced that she was going on a business trip. A trip that, strangely, no one seemed to know much about. No details, no itinerary, just a quick mention of it in passing, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. But my gut told me something wasn't right. And as much as I wanted to ignore the feeling, I couldn't. Something was off, and the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. There was a connection between Ethan and Claire, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but something that had been building right under my nose. So I decided to find out the truth. I couldn't let it go. I needed to know. I waited until the night before Claire was supposed to leave for her trip, my heart racing with a mix of dread and anticipation. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, but I had to follow this instinct, this need to uncover what had been hidden from me. I knew I was risking everything, my marriage, my friendship, but I had to know if my suspicions were justified. The next morning I followed Claire. I was careful, trying to be as discreet as possible. I stayed far enough behind her car so that she wouldn't see me, but close enough to make sure I could follow her wherever she went. She drove across town, past the familiar streets, the ones where we used to hang out together. And then, to my horror, she didn't head to the airport. Instead, she turned into a small boutique hotel, the kind that seemed far too upscale for someone who was supposed to be going on a business trip. I parked a block away, my hands shaking. This was it. I could feel the weight of what I was about to uncover pressing down on me. Every heartbeat felt like a drumbeat of impending disaster. I watched as Claire parked her car and got out, looking around nervously before walking toward the hotel entrance. She glanced over her shoulder, as if checking to see if anyone was watching. I couldn't look away. Minutes later, my stomach dropped when I saw him. Ethan. My husband. He walked out of the hotel lobby, looking casually at ease, as if he had no idea that the woman he had been secretly meeting was about to destroy everything he had built. He was smiling, his eyes lighting up when he saw Claire. They embraced, and I felt like I had been hit by a ton of bricks. It was all real. The doubt I had pushed aside for weeks was now undeniable. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I had to keep watching. My mind raced, trying to process the image before me. I had to have proof, solid proof, before I could confront them. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture, my hands trembling so badly that I could barely keep the camera steady. But I had it. The undeniable evidence that everything I had feared was true. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, just staring at the photo, the image of my husband and my best friend locked in an embrace that wasn't meant for friends. The tears came slowly at first, then faster, until they were pouring down my face. How could they? How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? Eventually, I pulled myself together. I couldn't keep hiding from the truth. As painful as it was, I needed to confront them. And so the next day, I invited Claire over for coffee. My hands were shaking when I prepared the table, the air in the room thick with anticipation. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. How could I? When she arrived, there was a nervousness in her eyes, a hesitation she couldn't hide. She knew what was coming. I didn't waste any time. I pushed the photo of her and Ethan across the table. Her face drained of color as she stared at it, the shame and guilt written all over her face. She didn't speak, just stared at the image, and that was all the confirmation I needed. She had betrayed me, and so had Ethan. I waited for one of them to say something, anything, but it was Ethan who came in, looking confused at first, before realizing the inevitable. He saw the photo and his face twisted in panic. He tried to talk his way out of it, to convince me it wasn't what it looked like, but I couldn't listen to his lies anymore. The truth was clear and it was ugly. The pain was suffocating. Betrayal, especially from the ones you trust most, cuts deeper than anything else. But I wasn't going to let them control my emotions anymore. I told them both to leave. I couldn't bear to look at them for another moment. They had taken everything from me, but I wouldn't let them take my dignity too. That was the last time I saw either of them. They had destroyed everything. My trust, my marriage, my friendship. But I refused to let them destroy me. I would rebuild piece by piece. I didn't know how long it would take, but I knew I would heal. It wouldn't be easy, but I was stronger than their lies, stronger than their betrayal. And that was something they could never take away. I barely slept that night. My mind wouldn't let go of the images. Ethan and Claire in that hotel, wrapped in a way that could never be explained away by mere friendship. I kept playing the scene over and over, trying to understand it, to fit the pieces together in some way that wouldn't make my stomach turn. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that the man I had built my life with, the man I had trusted so completely, could betray me like this. But there it was, undeniable and real. It wasn't just an affair, it was the most intimate betrayal. Ethan had chosen her. That night, when the house finally felt still, I curled up in bed, but sleep didn't come. Instead, I just stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of my own breathing, each breath feeling like it came from someone else, someone who wasn't me anymore. My mind drifted between memories of happier days, when I had no reason to question anything. I remembered the first time I met Ethan, how his smile made my heart race and how, for the longest time, I had believed that nothing could tear us apart. I remembered Claire too, her laughter, her presence in every corner of my life. She had been my sister, my confidant, the one person who had always been there for me. I couldn't understand how they had managed to hide this from me for so long. Was I really that blind? I had trusted them both without question, and now it felt like they had been laughing behind my back, sharing jokes and secrets while I stood there, oblivious, holding the pieces of our lives together. The anger that had been simmering beneath the shock slowly began to rise. It started as a dull ache, then a rush of heat, spreading through my chest until I could barely contain it. I needed to do something. I couldn't just sit here wallowing in pain, feeling sorry for myself. I needed to confront them again, but I knew it wasn't enough to simply get answers. I needed something deeper, something that would make them feel what I felt. The next day I reached out to Claire. I didn't care if she was still pretending everything was fine. I was done with pretending. She had no idea that I knew what had been going on, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I needed to see her face when I finally laid it all out for her, when I made her understand just how much she had destroyed. We arranged to meet at a cafe, a quiet spot on the edge of town where we used to meet after work to catch up. I didn't know if I was ready for this confrontation, but the thought of waiting any longer made me feel like I might suffocate. So I made my way there, feeling strangely detached, as if I were walking in someone else's shoes, someone who had already let go of their former life. When I arrived, she was already sitting at a corner table, looking just as she always did, her blonde hair neatly styled, her eyes bright and hopeful, as if she hadn't just destroyed everything I held dear. She looked up when I walked in, and for a split second she smiled. A smile that faltered when she saw my face. It was a nervous, awkward smile, the kind you give when you know you've been caught. "Hey," she said softly, her voice betraying the anxiety I could already see in her eyes. "Hey," I replied, my voice flat, detached. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't let it show. "Not now. I'm glad you could make it." She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, looking around the cafe, probably hoping for some escape that wouldn't come. "I've been thinking a lot," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the storm that was raging inside me. "About everything. And I think I'm finally ready to hear the truth." She swallowed, her face blanching. For a moment she didn't speak. She just looked at me, searching my face like she might find something, some hint that I didn't already know. But she couldn't find anything but the certainty of betrayal in my eyes. "Claire," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but firm. "You and Ethan, it wasn't just a friendship, was it? It was something else. Something more. Something you should have told me about. Something you didn't." Her eyes darted around, and I saw her lips tremble, but she remained silent, as if the words were stuck in her throat. I could see her fighting, trying to figure out whether to admit it or try to lie her way out of it. But I didn't need her to say anything. I had the photo. I had the evidence. There was nothing left to hide. "It's not what you think," she finally whispered. But the broken tone of her voice gave her away. "We never meant for it to happen. It just did." I leaned forward, my heart racing, not from fear, but from the anger that burned through my veins. "How long, Claire? How long have you been sleeping with my husband? How long have you been betraying me?" Her face crumpled. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't try to stop them. She didn't try to defend herself. Instead, she reached out, her hand trembling, as if she thought she could reach across the table and somehow make it all go away. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, the words so soft that they barely made a sound. "I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen. It just happened." I stared at her for a long time, letting her words sink in. I knew the truth now. I had the proof. But the reality of it, the weight of it, was more crushing than I had imagined. I had spent so many years thinking I knew everything about her, about Ethan, about our lives together. And now, everything felt like it had been built on a foundation of lies. The life I had known, the relationships I had invested in, they were all illusions. "What do you want from me, Claire?" I asked, my voice hard. "Do you want forgiveness? Do you want me to say it's okay? Because it's not. It's not okay." She shook her head, her tears falling freely now. "No, I don't expect that. I don't deserve that. I don't know what to say. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." I stood up, feeling a surge of emotion I couldn't contain. "You don't get to feel sorry for yourself," I said, my voice rising. You don't get to walk away from this, thinking you can just fix it with a few tears. You've destroyed everything. And I won't let you just apologize and make it go away. I turned and walked out of the cafe without looking back. The confrontation was over, but the pain, the rawness of it stayed with me. I could feel the anger coursing through my veins, the betrayal so fresh that it felt like a physical wound. When I got home, Ethan was sitting on the couch, watching TV as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just shattered my life. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. He looked up, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Hey babe," he said, trying to sound casual. "How'd it go with Claire?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw everything in his face, to make him feel the weight of what he had done to me. But instead I walked toward him slowly, deliberately, every step measured. I didn't need to say anything. He knew. The silence between us spoke volumes. Finally I spoke. "I know, Ethan. I know everything." He froze, his expression faltering. The guilt that flashed across his face was a sharp contrast to the man I thought I knew. But it didn't matter. It was too late. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice firm, unyielding. "Now." And that was the end of it. The next few days felt like they were suspended in time. My world had shifted and everything seemed distant, like I was moving through a haze, unable to truly grasp anything. The house that had once felt like home now felt cold, foreign. The furniture, the walls, even the pictures of us that hung on the walls, they all seemed like memories of someone else's life. The life I thought I had, the life I had worked so hard to build, was gone. Ethan had left. I didn't have to say anything more to him. He didn't fight me when I asked him to leave. There was nothing left for him here. Nothing he could say to make it better. The apology he offered, the tears he shed, they meant nothing. I had seen the way he looked at Claire when they thought I wasn't looking, the way his voice softened when he spoke her name. I wasn't stupid. I knew what it all meant. He had made his choice. But as much as I hated him for what he did, I couldn't help but feel a wave of sorrow. I had loved him. For years he had been my partner, my best friend, the one I thought would be by my side forever. And yet, in a moment, he shattered it all. I wanted to be angry, I wanted to scream and make him pay for what he had done to me, to us. But a part of me still mourned for the man I thought I knew, the man who was now a stranger. The hardest part was waking up each day, facing the reality of my new life. I had to get used to being alone, to not hearing his voice, to not sharing my day with him. I found myself walking through the house, touching things he had once touched, remembering the times when everything was right, when we had laughed together, dreamed together, believed that nothing could tear us apart. I kept asking myself why he did it. Why Claire? She had been my best friend for years. We had shared everything, our hopes, our fears, our dreams. How could she betray me like this? How could she destroy everything we had? I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into work, but even that felt hollow. I found myself distracted at my desk, my mind constantly wandering back to the images of them together, the soft touch they had shared. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. The thought of them, of Claire walking around with that smug look on her face like she had done nothing wrong, was unbearable. I wanted answers. I wanted to understand how this had happened, why they had both chosen to hurt me so deeply. I didn't reach out to Claire. I knew she wouldn't answer my calls anyway. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choice, and so had Ethan. They had both chosen to destroy the trust one had in them, to betray the love I had given them. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I needed to confront her again. I needed closure. I needed to understand why. A week after Ethan had left, I made a decision. I couldn't let it go. I had to see Claire one more time face to face. I had to ask her why, had to hear her say it out loud, that she had taken something that didn't belong to her. I didn't want to keep being the woman who had been betrayed. I wanted to be the one who took control back. The one who demanded the truth. I arranged to meet her at a park, neutral ground, away from the remnants of our past. The place we used to go to when we needed to talk, to clear our heads. The familiar bench by the lake where we had shared so many conversations. The bench that had once been a place of peace was now a place of confrontation. When I saw her walking toward me, I felt a pang of something, disappointment maybe. She looked exactly the same, with her perfect hair, her polished appearance, and the same fake smile that I used to adore. I used to admire her strength, her confidence. Now all I saw was the woman who had destroyed my life. "Hi," she said quietly, sitting down across from me. "Hi," I replied, my voice tight. "I didn't think you'd agree to meet." She sighed and looked down at her hands. "I didn't either, but I know I owe you this." I wanted to tell her to stop, to tell her that nothing she said could ever make this right. But instead I just nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I never meant for it to happen," she said, her voice trembling. "It was never supposed to go this far. I didn't mean to hurt you. But Ethan, he was just so perfect. I don't know how it happened. It just did." I stared at her, trying to hold myself together. I could feel the tears threatening to come, but I wouldn't let them. Not in front of her. "How long, Claire? How long has this been going on?" Her face turned pale, and she closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to find the words. "A few months. Started after we went on that weekend trip, remember? We were all supposed to go together, but you couldn't make it. It was like we were both waiting for the moment to happen. And it did." I clenched my fists, trying not to scream. The weekend trip. I remembered it clearly now. Ethan had been so distant, so odd when he came back. I had chalked it up to work stress, but now I realized what it really was. A lie. Another lie. Why Claire? Why him? You were my best friend. We shared everything. How could you betray me like this? How could you betray us? Her eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away quickly. "I don't know," she said softly. "I wish I could explain it, but I can't. I felt something for him. I didn't mean for it to happen, but it did. And I can't undo it. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to tear her apart with my words, make her feel every ounce of the pain she had caused me. But all I felt was numb. I couldn't even summon the energy to be angry. I just felt empty. "Hello. Do you love him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at the ground, fidgeting with her hands. Finally she spoke, her voice almost inaudible. "Yes, I do. I love him." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The man I had loved, the man I had trusted with my heart, was now with her. The woman who had promised to always have my back. The woman I had called my sister. I stood up abruptly, not trusting myself to stay calm. "I don't want to hear this. I don't want your excuses. I don't want your apologies. You've taken everything from me, Claire. Everything. And I'll never forgive you for that." I turned to walk away, not waiting for her to respond. I didn't care. I didn't want her words, her explanations. I just needed to get out of there. I needed to leave the past behind and figure out how to move on. But as I walked away, a small part of me knew that nothing would ever truly be the same. My heart, shattered into a million pieces, would never be whole again. Trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo what they had done. It wasn't just the affair that had destroyed me. It was the lies, the deceit, the way my world had been ripped apart by the people I loved most. I would rebuild. I had no other choice. But the scars of their betrayal would never fade. The days after that conversation with Claire were the hardest of my life. I had expected some sort of catharsis, some relief from confronting the truth, but instead, it only left me feeling more broken. I thought I'd be able to move on once I had all the answers. But the answers didn't heal anything. They only exposed the raw wound deeper. I could feel the emptiness in every room of the house, every corner that had once been filled with laughter, with love. It was gone. There was nothing left now but the ghost of what had been. Ethan had called me a few times after he left, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. Each ring felt like a betrayal of my own sense of self-worth. I couldn't bear hearing his voice, not now, not after everything that had happened. Every message he left was filled with apologies and promises that he would make it right, that he would fight for us. But I didn't want his promises anymore. I didn't want a man who had betrayed me. I didn't want a man who had lied to me, who had allowed a friendship to turn into something so much more, behind my back in secret. I knew deep down that even if I had the courage to talk to him again, nothing would ever be the same. The trust had been shattered beyond repair. Our love had been tainted by betrayal, by deceit, and I couldn't unsee the images of him with her, couldn't unhear the quiet whispers between them, the stolen looks, the shared glances. I couldn't forget how he had kept the affair hidden, how he had lied to me about everything. But despite all of this, I couldn't help but think about him. I couldn't stop thinking about the way things had once been. I remembered our late-night talks, our walks in the park, the inside jokes that only the two of us shared. I remembered the way he used to hold me when I was upset, the way he made me feel safe, loved. There had been a time when I thought we could conquer anything together. I had believed in him so completely, so fully. And now, the person I had once trusted with my heart was the one who had destroyed it. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the memories, all the little moments that seemed so insignificant at the time but now felt like everything. The sound of his voice when he kissed me goodnight. The way he would hold me close in the mornings, whispering promises of forever. Where had all of that gone? How had it all turned into this? I couldn't escape the images of him with her. Those stolen moments that I had never been meant to see. I started avoiding places that had once been familiar. The coffee shop where we used to meet. The quiet bookstore where we'd spend hours picking out books for each other. I couldn't walk into those places without feeling the weight of their betrayal. Even the familiar streets of our neighborhood felt foreign. Everywhere I went, I saw echoes of what had been. The remnants of a love that had been destroyed in the most brutal of ways. I tried to stay busy to keep my mind occupied, but nothing seemed to work. I spent more time at work than ever before, staying late to finish projects, but even then my mind would wander. I would find myself thinking about them, about what they had done, about how easily they had thrown away everything. I had trusted Claire. I had trusted her with my life, with my secrets, with my heart. And now, she was the one who had destroyed everything. It was hard to reconcile the woman I had once called my best friend with the woman who had betrayed me. I tried not to think about Ethan, but every time I closed my eyes, his face appeared. The guilt he had shown when he left, the way he had begged for forgiveness, for a chance to make things right. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream at him to make him feel the way I felt. But instead I just felt numb. I had no anger left. I had no tears left. All that remained was emptiness. I considered calling him, confronting him again. But what would I say? What could I possibly say to make this any better? How could I make him understand the depth of what he had done? How could I ever look at him the same way again? There was nothing he could say that would undo the damage. There was no apology big enough to fix this. And then there was Claire. I couldn't escape the thoughts of her either. I had tried to sever all ties with her, but a part of me still wondered if there was more to the story. I couldn't understand how she had allowed it to happen, how she could have betrayed me so completely. But then again, was I so different? Had I not been complicit in my own ignorance, in my own refusal to see what was right in front of me? Had I not been blind to the signs, to the way they had both pulled away from me, little by little, until there was nothing left? I had been so sure of everything, of Ethan, of Claire, of my life. And now I was left with nothing but doubt. The life I had known was gone, and I wasn't sure I even knew who I was anymore. Was I the woman who had been betrayed? Was I the woman who had trusted too easily? Was I the woman who had been so desperate for love that I had ignored the signs? I didn't know anymore. Days turned into weeks, and still I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that clung to me like a second skin. I found myself avoiding people, shutting myself off from the world. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to explain what had happened, to tell anyone the truth. It was too painful. It was too raw. But eventually I had to face the reality of it. I had to face the fact that Ethan and Claire were gone. They had chosen each other. And I had to find a way to move on, to rebuild my life from the ashes they had left behind. I started taking small steps, going for walks again, picking up a book, doing things I used to enjoy. It wasn't easy. It felt like I was walking through life in a fog, trying to find my way through a world that no longer made sense. But I knew that I had to keep going. I couldn't let them win. I couldn't let their betrayal destroy me. One afternoon, I decided to visit a nearby park. It was a beautiful day, the sun shining through the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. I sat on a bench near the lake, taking in the calmness of it all. I closed my eyes and let the sounds of the world around me wash over me. The birds chirping, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, the distant laughter of children playing. For the first time in weeks, I felt a moment of peace. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what the future held. But in that moment I realized something. I would survive this. I would heal in time. The pain would never completely go away, but it wouldn't define me either. I was still here. And I would find my way back to myself, even if it meant walking through the fire. Ethan and Claire had destroyed the life I had known. But they couldn't take away who I was. They couldn't take away my strength. I wasn't the same woman who had trusted blindly. I wasn't the same woman who had been content to live in the shadows of their lies. But I was still me. And that was enough. The weeks that followed felt like a blur of slow, painful recovery. I focused on putting one foot in front of the other, trying to regain control of my life. I still couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that clung to me like a heavy weight. It felt like I was suffocating in it, drowning in the constant reminders of what had been stolen from me. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw someone I didn't recognize. A woman marked by loss, by the cruel reality that the life I had built was nothing but a house of cards. But little by little I started to pull myself together. I didn't have a choice. I couldn't stay trapped in the past forever. I knew I couldn't keep running from the truth of what had happened. The affair, the lies, everything, they were part of my story now. And I couldn't erase them no matter how much I wanted to. At work, I threw myself into my projects, keeping busy with deadlines and meetings. It was easier to focus on tasks that didn't require me to think too deeply about my personal life. But even in the busy moments, I could feel the echoes of everything that had been lost. The world felt off-center, as though something fundamental had shifted and nothing could ever feel whole again. On weekends, I tried to get out of the house. I went for long walks, spent hours in coffee shops, even ventured to new places I had never been before. But I always found myself thinking about Ethan and Claire. I couldn't escape the fact that they were out there living their new lives, while I was left to pick up the pieces. I still didn't understand why they'd done it. It was as though a part of me kept searching for answers, hoping that somehow I could make sense of their betrayal. But the more I searched, the more empty I felt. There were no answers to be found. Only hurt. Only loss. Sometimes I would pass by the cafe where Claire and I had shared so many laughs, so many quiet moments, and my stomach would tighten. It felt impossible to be in those spaces that had once been so familiar, so comforting. Now they were tainted. Every place, every memory, felt like a reminder of the life I had lost. But I knew I had to keep moving. I had to reclaim what was mine, even if that meant learning to live in a world that felt unfamiliar. One evening, after another long day of work, I found myself sitting in front of my laptop, aimlessly scrolling through social media. I hadn't checked Ethan's page in weeks. I had deleted him from my feed, blocked him from messaging me, but still there was this nagging urge to know what was happening in his life. It felt ridiculous, this need to keep tabs on someone who had hurt me so deeply. But I couldn't help it. It was like a compulsion, an itch I couldn't scratch. I clicked on his name. His profile was still up, still full of pictures from before. His smile, the one I used to adore, seemed so far away now, so distant. There were pictures of him with friends, some with Claire, but there was nothing that gave away the secret I knew was hidden between them. Nothing that would tell the world that their affair had gone public. They were both careful, hiding behind the social masks they had crafted. But then something caught my eye. There was a photo of Ethan and Claire standing in front of a lake, smiling, holding hands. It was taken recently, maybe just a few weeks ago. They looked so happy together, so at ease, the same way they had looked when we had been together. It was like the world had shifted completely, and they had become the version of the life I once thought I had with Ethan. The anger I had buried deep inside started to resurface, hot and sharp, filling me with a sickening sense of betrayal. I slammed my laptop shut, not wanting to look at it anymore. I had already seen enough. The pain was like a familiar ache, one that I had grown used to but never truly accepted. The fact that they had moved on so easily, so quickly, it was almost unbearable. It made me question everything I had believed in, every promise we had made to each other. Was it all just a lie? Was everything I had given to Ethan nothing more than an illusion? But the truth was clear now. He had chosen her. Claire had chosen him. And there was nothing I could do to change that. All I could do was move forward. The road ahead felt daunting, but I knew I had to walk it. For myself. For the person I used to be. I started taking small steps toward healing. I sought therapy, talking through my feelings with a professional who helped me process the hurt and the anger. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt like I was making no progress at all, when the weight of the past felt too much to carry. But I kept going. I had to. I couldn't let them break me, even though they had broken my heart. At the same time, I reconnected with people I had lost touch with during the years I had been with Ethan. Old friends who had slipped away when I was too focused on my relationship. I found solace in their company, in their laughter, in the reminder that I was more than just the woman who had been cheated on. I was a person with my own dreams, my own life. I was not defined by the betrayal that had shattered me. I was more than that. It wasn't long before I found myself feeling a little stronger, a little more like the woman I used to be before everything had fallen apart. The pain was still there, of course. It would always be there. But I learned how to live with it, to carry it with me as part of my story. Months passed, and I continued on my journey of healing. I started doing things I had put off for years, things I had always wanted to do but had never made time for. I took a painting class, something I had always wanted to try. I traveled to a few places I had dreamed of visiting. I spent time volunteering at a local animal shelter, finding comfort in helping those who had no voice of their own. Slowly, I began to reclaim parts of myself that I had lost in the shadow of my relationship with Ethan. I was no longer defined by the life I had with him. I was no longer defined by the person who had hurt me. One day I ran into Claire. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't entirely a surprise either. I had known it was inevitable. I had seen her around, always keeping my distance, but this time we found ourselves face to face, on the street outside a cafe. She looked exactly the same, beautiful, polished, with that fake smile I remembered so well. For a moment I stood frozen, not knowing what to do. I could feel the anger rising in me, but instead of confronting her, I just took a deep breath. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. I had moved past that, even if the scar was still there. I had learned that the best way to deal with someone who had betrayed you was to walk away with your head held high. "Hi," she said, her voice soft and uncertain. I didn't know what to say. But after a long pause, I looked her in the eyes and simply replied, "I hope you're happy, Claire." It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't a forgiveness. It was just the truth. She seemed taken aback, her smile faltering for a moment. I'm sorry for everything, she said. "I never meant to hurt you." I nodded, though it wasn't an apology I was waiting for. I had heard it all before. It's too late for apologies. And with that I walked away. As I turned the corner and walked toward the bus stop, I realized something. I had let go. Finally. It didn't feel like a victory, but it didn't feel like defeat either. It was just another step forward in a life that I was slowly rebuilding on my own terms. Ethan and Claire had their own path now, and I had mine. And for the first time in a long time, I was starting to believe that my path could be just as beautiful, just as meaningful, as the one I had once shared with them. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever was. The following weeks were filled with quiet introspection. It was strange learning to be alone again, to have my own space without the constant presence of Ethan or Claire lingering in the background. I had spent so much of my life wrapped up in my relationship with Ethan, in the friendship I had cherished with Claire, that it had become my world. Now that world was gone, shattered into a million pieces. Yet, as painful as it was to face that loss, I also began to realize something liberating. I was free. Free to rediscover who I was. Free to live my life without the constant weight of betrayal. Free to find joy in the things that had once been overshadowed by my dependence on others. One evening I decided to take a trip to a park nearby, a place I used to visit with Ethan. It was our spot, a quiet corner by the water where we would sit and talk for hours. As I walked there, I felt a flutter of anxiety in my chest. Would it hurt too much to be there alone? Would the memories be too much to bear? But I had made a promise to myself that I would face these places, these memories. I wasn't going to run from them. When I reached the park, the familiar smell of damp earth and fresh grass hit me, and for a moment, I was taken back to those days. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over everything. I sat down on the same bench where we had spent so many afternoons, and I closed my eyes. I could almost hear his voice in my head, the way he used to tease me, the way he would touch my arm or hold my hand. But as I sat there, the weight of those memories no longer felt crushing. Instead, they were just memories. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that I was no longer living in their shadow. I wasn't holding on to the past in the same way I had been. I still loved Ethan. Think I always would. But the love I felt for him wasn't the same. It wasn't the pure, unwavering devotion I had once had. It had been tainted, broken by his choices, by the betrayal of the one person I had trusted most. And as much as it hurt to acknowledge, I had to let it go. I had to move forward, even if that meant leaving behind the idea of us that had once seemed so certain. Later that week, I met up with an old friend of mine, Lila. We had been close during college but had drifted apart over the years. I invited her for lunch, unsure of what to expect. It felt strange to reconnect, to share parts of my life I hadn't talked about with anyone in months.